Bild's overview. Hello, this is Bild in Russia, live. With us, Valeriy Solovey, political scientist. Hello, Maxim. Hello, everyone. Valeriy, where is General Surovikin? I really want to rhyme this. Where, no one knows where. Maxim, he is... Let me use that precise legal language that is applied to him. He is now under the restriction to make certain actions, and that restriction is imposed on his connection with anyone, to communicate with his family. I don't know if he's at home right now, but he is not and was not at any detention centers, that's for sure. Let's talk a little bit about him. Who is he? In what sense, Maxim? Could you please clarify that? In a sense that how significant is his influence and how he can be connected with Prigozhin and Prigozhin's mutiny. Firstly, I thought his connection was that Surovikin knew about the mutiny and did not interfere, because he had his own interest. He wanted to make his position more strong, to become a Minister of Defense or to take the position of the head of the General Staff. Those posts were promised to him, and he had reasons to hope for that. But the latest information tells us that he knew about it, and he actually took some part in planning the mutiny, and some group of other officers also participated in that, and there are about dozens of generals that participated in this, and those generals will be interrogated about what was happening too. Secondly, Surovikin, according to the comments I heard, had a pretty good reputation in the Russian military forces, and the Russian military forces now are able to deter Ukrainian offensive, and they can do that due to Surovikin, because when he was made a head of the special military operation in the fall of the last year, he immediately shifted to the concept of so-called strategic defense, and he started building fortifications on the newly annexed territories, and now this line of defense is called line of Surovikin. And because he was insisting on the strategic defense, he was removed from his post, and the special military operation was headed by General Gerasimov, the head of the General Staff, and now he is removed from his post as well, and he was removed from the post before the mutiny. So who is now in charge of the special military operation, I don't know. Okay, fine, then let's see whom the Minister of Defense rely on and whom he is interacting with. Well, actually, the Minister of Defense, he didn't make any orders to anyone, and he didn't interact with anyone. He is just following the orders that the president gives to him. At least he was doing it until now. What's happening now in the Ministry of Defense, I have no idea. But according to the rumors that I heard, it looks like chaos. Now a natural process is going on. They're trying to find who is guilty. And naturally, as it usually happens, some of the guilty will turn out to be not guilty, and those who did not participate in the mutiny, they already awarded. And this quasi-Putin came out to the entryway of the Palace of Facets and awarded those men. What's going on, we will learn probably in a couple of weeks. Back to Surovikin then. Who is Surovikin for Shoygu, for the Minister of Defense? He is a threat for Shoygu. He was a threat for Gerasimov, the head of the General Staff, too, and they knew about it. But how could Prigozhin took such an important position and to pose a threat? But you know, the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, this is the President of Russia and not the Minister of Defense and not the head of the General Staff. And President has had his own reasons to do that. He likes creating such situations of checks and balances, and he's trying to keep this internal conflict to be able to resolve those conflicts himself, to be like arbiter. So and this situation kind of turned against the president as a result. Right now, the Western media is writing about the connection between Surovikin and Prigozhin, and they say there were lists of the private military company, and Surovikin was in those lists, and they're like the same team. Well, I don't know if it's the same team, but we know the connection existed, and this is a fact, proven fact, and we will see which of those facts actually will be confirmed in the future. But in any case, it will not entail any case of generals, and there won't be any public punishment like President Erdogan in Turkey did after the failed coup there. The Russian leadership is afraid of that because it may demonstrate at the point of the climax of the military conflict in Ukraine, it'll show that the army is not loyal, or at least some of their leadership of the army is not loyal. They don't want to do this. They want to punish the military officers, but they want to do it quietly, not to show anything. So you actually don't suspect that they're humanists in the Russian government. Humanists, oh no, they're opposite. Maxim, actually, this is a good joke on your side. Back to Prigozhin. He seems to be something alien to the Putin system. Do you understand how it happened to be like that? Because he kind of became a part of it and then he rebelled against it. Well, any expert can explain it to you how that happened, but of course it looks spectacular. A person who used to be a part of Russian elite, but his behavior, his background, and his lifestyle and ethos was very, very different from the elite. But maybe this is what made him successful. The thing is that Putin likes this macho-type man, and Putin was absolutely sure that Yevgeny Prigozhin is his own thing, that Putin literally raised this guy, kind of fed this guy from the budget of Russia and gave him all the privileges and rights and moved him close to himself. And this person will be loyal and will play a very important role for Putin, because Prigozhin was one of the closest cronies of Putin up until last year, and he was one of the few who could very quickly get in touch with the Russian president, and there are not so many people like that. Putin was highly appreciating Prigozhin's idea to bring prisoners to the private military company. Putin thought it was like a genius idea, and he gave him green light for everything, and everything was going pretty well until Prigozhin started expressing those personal traits and declaring certain things that were against the essence of the Russian establishment. Besides, those declarations were threatening the Russian military forces and the law enforcement agencies. Well, Prigozhin started saying these things kind of very privately back in Syria, and then he started saying these things publicly in Ukraine, and for the last 3 months he was very outspoken about it. And I remember how you told me in one of our streams that it's not just words, he is ready to start a mutiny. Yes, I spoke about it a lot, and the president was warned about him, and that there will be a mutiny, and the president didn't believe that. The president thought that such a loyal soldier couldn't start a mutiny against the president. But then Putin was convinced that Prigozhin should be restricted, and Prigozhin fell into disgrace. It's the beginning of 2023, and after that he was coming out with political statements, and he was quite successful in public relations, and he was promoting himself and the military company. And before the mutiny, he had this trip across the country, PR trip, and according to the statistics and psychology that they ran back then, Prigozhin turned out to be the second popular person after Putin in Russia. And probably he went a little dizzy about that, and he realized that he could be destroyed. And Prigozhin was warned that his private military company could be disbanded, and also that there was the order of the president to neutralize Prigozhin. He could be physically destroyed or interned. And those people who warned him, they saved his life several times 1 week before the mutiny. Prigozhin was preparing for the mutiny 1.5 months in advance. But they were thinking that the mutiny will be at the end of the summer, but because of the circumstances that I mentioned above, made him rush. So it wasn't unexpected for the law enforcement agencies and for the army. Oh no, no. I knew it, Maxim, and I told you that the political crisis will go into the open phase, and Prigozhin will be trying to destroy Russian statehood. I thought it would be later, but the circumstances made him rush. Do you think it's anti-Putin mutiny? Yes. The goal was to take over the power, political power in the country, and nobody has doubt about it, neither Putin nor anybody else. Valery, I remember how shocked you were by the Russian society, how it took the war with Ukraine. Not everybody, but how people were ready to take the war. Those even who were critical to the war and who were saying, what can we do but send our children to the war. Prigozhin is number 2 in popularity after Putin. So is it the same shock to you? Well, actually, I'm very disappointed. I understand why it's happened, but I'm very disappointed. I have no enthusiasm about Prigozhin. I do admit some of his virtues, they do exist, and he used those virtues in order to gain popularity. And I'm not talking about just resources, but also his personal virtues. In terms of PR, his strategy was absolutely perfect, but I'm upset about it. But this is what I need to say, that Russian society did not react to it at all. Maybe didn't have time to do that. Maybe if Prigozhin actually entered Moscow, and technically it was possible, then part of the Moscow society would took it quite positively. And I know that there are such moods, but the things were unfolding very quickly. And the lack of this positive reaction of the society, that was one of the reasons why Prigozhin stopped, why he didn't decide to go further down the road. He was expecting to get support, and as you remember, he was asking for this support, and he was saying, join me. And it wasn't, he was addressing just the military, but also other stratas of the society. But actually, Valery, it wasn't the main motive of his, so we didn't see any propaganda campaign on the side of Prigozhin. Well, actually, they didn't have time for that, Maxim. They were a bit confused, and as I understand, this propaganda machine was kind of blocked, and that was the first steps how they blocked it, that Prigozhin wouldn't be able to spread the information. Maybe I'm mistaken, maybe sometime later we will clarify the situation, but I was told that some preventive measures were undertaken. But Maxim, in general, I would agree with you that, as I said, Prigozhin was a great PR expert for himself, but as PR campaign of this whole enterprise and political enterprise and making political statements, he didn't do much about it. I may say that they tried to do something like that in Moscow, but before that they didn't do anything. When we talk to people who are not in politics and who don't follow the politics, and they just ask the same question, why Prigozhin wasn't just killed? Well, actually, Maxim, it's not that easy to do that, and let me explain to you. Well, first of all, Prigozhin was warned. When they were preparing assassination of him, he was warned about it, those who were sympathizing with him, and he managed to get out of it. And there is also a delicate element here. When they were thinking about neutralizing him, they wanted to detain him. And the thing is that Prigozhin controls so-called mob's money of the Kremlin, and the money he controls is $15 billion, and that lump amount is in Africa, and he is the man who provides access to it, so he couldn't be destroyed. They couldn't be used helicopter that would destroy him just like that. This story was a bit more complex. He has this temporary immunity, so to speak. All right, finishing on the mutiny. So what do you think? How it ended? Well, actually, it didn't end yet. It's just the first act that ended, and we're expecting the second act, and the second act will be at the end of the summer and maybe beginning of the fall, because this mutiny actually showed us the weakness of the Russian state machine from the top to the bottom. And of course, in the next act, they will use the forces that are in the very core of the Russian establishment. They understand the situation is ready, and they need to change the authorities, because the current leaders cannot really manage it. Yesterday we had Maxim Samarukov, a political scientist, and he said this. He said that after each mutiny, the supreme power comes out of it stronger rather than weaker. By suppressing the mutiny, the supreme power becomes stronger. Do you agree with this statement? No, I don't agree with that. There is no any correlation between the two. In this case, the power showed its weakness, so we can't really say it's strong. And let me remind you this. The attempt of the Bolsheviks in the summer of 1917 was suppressed by the provisional government. Did provisional government become stronger if we see what happened in October of 1917, a few months later? No, I don't think there is any correlation. We saw a conflict of one party of war with another party of war. No, I would say that, Maxim. I don't think that if Prigozhin would be fighting for the political power, that he would continue this war line, so to speak. Everything could be changed. He is quite flexible, and he flexibly responds to what people demanding in the society and in the West. I think he wouldn't mind to give Putin away to the Hague criminal court to get his immunity. So please don't underestimate the flexibility of people. We judge them by the statements they make and see what they say. So far, Prigozhin demonstrated his flexibility, that he can change his behavior, and he could have changed his behavior one more time. That's why, Maxim, it wasn't predetermined. And actually, in Russia, there is no war party anymore. In Russia, there are several modifications of the peace party, just nobody knows how to crawl out of it. Those supporters of the war till the victorious end, these are the readers of the Telegram channel of Girkin Strelkov, this officer that he's so pro-war. Actually, it's quite amusing that a year ago you were saying there was no peace parties anymore, but only war parties. Back then I was saying that the peace party was actually quite weak, and it can't publicly say much. But now it doesn't do it publicly either, but there is no war party anymore, and it started dissolving at the end of the fall of the last year. Prigozhin's going to Belarus. This is a legend, or there is such an option for him? Well, actually, yes, Belarus, this is a preliminary station or interim station, so Lukashenko wouldn't want them too long. So just imagine if there were like 8,000 people. Of course, there were no 25,000 troops, as Prigozhin said. They almost managed to get to Moscow, but they can get to Minsk very quickly if they want to. I think that this is just an interim station before the trip to Africa. So I think they just stay there for a little bit, and some of the Wagner troops will go to Africa. So what do you think? Prigozhin and his troops staying in Belarus, is it a destabilizing element? Can it detonate the situation in Belarus? Well, see, Maxim, Prigozhin is demonstrating incredible flexibility, and if he starts a revolution against Lukashenko in order to give him a way to the justice, then it will be unprecedented. But I don't think that he's ready to move in that direction. But I think he might think about it. Valeriy, as you reminded us, and you said that Prigozhin could be a potential trigger of mutiny processes, do you see any other figures that can lead such a mutiny? Well, God gives a vicious cow no horns. So if you go to a bar in Moscow and you will see two in a group of 5 that will be ready to lead a mutiny. But if you're talking about real resources, then there are not so many people in Russia who could do that, and they won't do a mutiny, they would do a coup in Russia. So it's hard to go to that area, but and I'm afraid what you're going to say about it, but who was coming to the crowds in Derbent? Maxim, come on. So even those skeptics, they say that it was a double. So Luke Alexander Nevzorov, Russian journalist, who is talking about, yes, we're quite skeptical about the presence of a double, but yes, in Derbent, in city of Derbent, there was a double, not Putin. So what's important here? The differences were just so glaring that there wasn't even an impression that they're somehow trying to emphasize those differences. Maybe they're trying to compromise Putin. If it's so, then this deep state is actually playing against Putin. But there is a simpler version. But they kind of don't care anymore. They kind of, well, that'll work anyway, because people eat it anyway. So if he looks like Putin or not, who cares? But if we look at it from the politological point of view, well, let's say that's a double. So what does it change? Well, actually, it changes a lot from the point of view of how elites look at Putin. Well, from the point of view of society, not much. For people, they probably will be just indifferent. For them, it's kind of amusing. But for the elites, it's quite important, because if the president is substituted by a double, and in his public addresses he is substituted more and more, so which means that the president is not doing so well, then we need to think about how we're going to change the president. Besides, the president didn't show himself in any way during the mutiny. But what about this night or morning address to the nation that Putin did? Well, actually, you would agree with me that it was quite strange. Let alone that that address was read by the double, not by the president. And besides, if you want to demonstrate that you control the situation, you shouldn't use words. You should show footage, like the president is sitting and looking at the maps. Remember Lukashenko, when there was a meeting in his country, he was running around with a machine gun and flying on the helicopter and all that. It was stupid, but he was in the center of it. But in Russia, how the Russian president demonstrated his control of the situation for everybody, he was absent. If you're absent in the media, so it means that you don't exist. So this is how the world works, and the president showed his brilliant absence. And since everything was run by Nikolai Patrushev, the head of the Security Council, so he gained some points, a lot of points actually. He got quite an advantage, I mean, in this administration fight. So he wasn't in the media. Well, he didn't have to be, because his post does not imply that. So who is supposed to be in the media? The head of the defense ministry, the head of the general staff, and all that. But where are they? They're in the same place where General Surovikin was. So there was another head of the state that was there. So it was Alexander Lukashenko who was really engaged in that, the head of the president of Belarus. So what about his stories? Are they true? Well, his stories probably 5-7% are true, and he wasn't participating in any negotiations. He was engaged only for the last 2 hours when he had to give guarantees to Prigozhin that Belarus will accept him. This is what he did, but all the rest is just his fantasy. He got this right to fantasize in order to fill this media space, so to speak, and he didn't speak with the Russian president about it. Another thing that's important, the promise to Prigozhin to fire Gerasimov, head of General Staff, and the Minister of Defense Shoygu, it was given by Lukashenko on behalf of the Russian president, and the Russian president disavowed it. Let's talk about the one whom they called one of the beneficiaries of the situation. This is General Zolotov, the head of the Russian Guard. So, do you think that the tanks will strengthen the Russian Guard? So, why not to give them the nuclear weapons? So, they will use tanks for the parades. And what tanks they're gonna get? So, everything that can move, self-propelled, everything is already in Ukraine, so they're not gonna get anything. Besides, they don't have tank drivers, they don't have the artillery troops, and this is just a temporary, situational advantage. So Zolotov showed his loyalty, and actually he publicly said some horrible things. Remember what he said? So we couldn't stop them near Moscow, so we were preparing to fight with them in Moscow. So, in other words, one of the commanders-in-chief of the military forces of Russia is saying that they were planning to have bloody fights in Moscow, and of course they couldn't have them in Moscow. The thing is that Prigozhin, they had the secret weapons against the Russian Guard, those plastic cups. They know that the plastic cups work very well against the Russian Guard. But the intention that the Russian guards had shows you the style of the Russian leadership and how those Surovikin, the law enforcement agencies, how they treat people and how they take people and everything that is happening in Russia. You know, Valeriy, there was footage that they showed how people responded to this mutiny, and some people came, some people stayed at home, and you can actually see the discussion of the Rostov people. Some people were saying they were welcoming the Wagner troops, and they were saying there was a few hundreds of people who came to welcome Wagner troops. So what was your conclusions looking at this footage? So the same conclusion that I made before everything happened. So first, there were no police, no Russian Guard, all the Siloviki, all the law enforcement agencies wouldn't be there. So society doesn't care about the power, about the authorities. Nobody's going to support the authorities. Nobody's going to defend the authorities. Even the Единая Россия party, the United Russia party. Have you seen any supporting statement of this party? Well, 2 days after, we've heard that the governors were saying that if Wagner troops came, they would stop them. But where were you, dear governors, for 2 days? Well, actually, governors of 3 regions, they had phone conversations with Prigozhin, and they said to him that they were not going to impede him. So yesterday and the day before yesterday, the FSB was insisting on firing those governors. But you can't say that all police disappeared somewhere, because people who were delivering humanitarian aid, they said that they had to bribe those traffic police on the road. Well, see, this is instinct. This is kind of their vital instinct to get the bribes. So it has nothing to do to the politics and to existential demands and the fates of the Russian state. Back to what was going on during these days. When you heard that Mikhail Khodorkovsky was saying, get armed, when he was addressing Russian people, well, I understand what was the motive of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, but I think that this address was inappropriate. Why? The simple reason, if you're calling people to do something, then you have to be in Russia and to show how you do it. So if you can't do it yourself, then don't ask others to risk. In one of his interviews, Khodorkovsky said, so these authorities wouldn't go on their own, so it will be the result of violence or a threat to apply violence. So that's the only way that these authorities will go away. So what do you think about these words? Well, I actually agree with them, but there's a huge difference between using armed violence and the threat of using armed violence. But as you understand, the threat to use armed violence, this is the peaceful option. For some reason, they think if there is armed violence, then the key ingredient of change is this some law enforcement bodies. And I think it's quite important. And Khodorkovsky, I think he implied that when he said people get armed. An important ingredient, this is the mass political practices, because any armed forces, they have to be together with the society. But regarding mass political practices, who can initiate them? Who can trigger these dynamics? What kind of dynamics will be? Under what conditions? These are all questions, and only life can give you answers to those questions. And in some way, life gave us an incredible experiment, and pretty much peaceful experiment that was just within Russia, just recently. I'm talking about this mutiny. This is what I'm trying to understand. How many people actually know about it and heard about it? Did people understand who was trying to attack whom? According to some of the observations, the majority of people didn't realize at all what was going on. The question was, who is Prigozhin? Is he from Ukraine? Is he Ukrainian? Maxim, for political crisis, it doesn't matter how many people know about it. What's important is how many people of those who know are ready to participate in the crisis. But I have to tell you that there was enough of people who knew and to generate the participants for this crisis. Probably didn't have enough time to do that. But now, since they didn't manage to do it once, so I think they will be more sensitive to the next stage and the signals they may receive to start it. And I know that there are many people who desire to do that. Many people guess what was going on. And if you look at the dynamics, at the anti-government activities that you can see in Russian Federation when they burn the conscription offices and when they attack other facilities. So these attempts exist. Valery, you probably heard about this way of measuring what's going on in Russia. If the restaurants, are restaurants full or not? Some of my correspondents in Moscow were saying that the restaurants were full. So what do you think? Is it legitimate to use this type of measurement? So, and if we use that, so what does it tell us? No, I don't think it's an indicator really. So they were just Friday and Saturday, when in Moscow, traditionally, all those places, restaurants, I mean, they're full. So, and I think this tension was kind of making it even spicier, so to speak. And people were saying to themselves, so maybe this is our last party, let's make it big. That's why they went to the restaurants. So it's an interesting indicator, but to use it to actually get what's going on in the country, I don't think it's right. So what do you think? These events, what did they show? If the authorities give in, those who substituted, it comes stronger, more cruel, or even worse than what we have? Yes, there is such a risk, and I'm sure that if Evgeny Prigozhin came in power, there will be a lot of problems, maybe more problems that we could have solved, but this risk existed, and this part of his reputation, this is the part that he's carrying with himself. But there are other people that who are not less dangerous than he is, maybe even more dangerous than he is, because they can do it more systematically. I'm not going to say who they are, but I think they have pretty good chances in the second act to be in the front stage. If we talk about the reaction of the Kremlin, so they show Putin everywhere. He went somewhere, he's making jokes, he's with the crowds. So do you think that this is a response to those events? And so what does it tell us? Does the Kremlin look at people as an important factor in this story? The Kremlin looks at people as a great mute. This mute was silent for a long time, but as you said a few minutes ago, people were quite positive about Prigozhin's moving to Rostov and making this mutiny. What they do, they show that the authorities, they talk to people and people are ready to get united around power. This is main propaganda. The first one is that nothing happened and people should forget about it, and I think the use of the term mutiny applied to the event of 23rd of June, it's not going to be a mutiny. They consider it as a compromising of the military forces of Russia. So what they will be informing people about, this is how people are uniting around the president. Those people who can see and make conclusions, they already made their conclusions and they already began to act. Right now there is a quite intensive preparation for the next act of this drama, and I would say it's happening backstage right now. Valeriy, do you have a feeling that the West is afraid of this turn of events and wasn't ready for them? Yes, I have this feeling. They knew it might have happened. They did not exclude it. They know it's quite probable. But again, Prigozhin has a pretty infamous reputation, as I was explaining. You look at his background and you realize that if this person gets to the part of the nuclear weapons, how he's going to act and what he's going to do, nobody knows. And they were afraid in the West. And it intensified the fear of that famous fear that has to do with unpredictability of the change of power in Russia. Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, said that Russia is not supposed to explain anything to anybody about the events that were happening, and he's trying to devalue these events. Then whom Vladimir Putin was calling when he talked to Kazakhstan, Turkey, and Armenia? Why? He was asking for military support from Kazakhstan, and also when he called Lukashenko, he was asking for military support. He was asking Tokayev for that, and he was telling him that, do you remember that I moved Russian troops to Kazakhstan when you had a crisis? And Tokayev said it's just domestic problem of Russia. Well, Kazakhstani army, with all due respect, that this army didn't have any military experience, and against Prigozhin, why? Yes, Putin did ask for that help, and that actually proves that situation was extremely critical for the Russian government, and they were trying to do whatever it takes. So in any case, he had to ask for help, as you said, and he was trying to explain the situation somehow, right? Yes. And you probably noticed that former President Medvedev had some tweets, and they were kind of strange, as if he was threatening the West that if nuclear weapons will be taken over by such people as Prigozhin, then they will use it, and he was threatening the West that he's going to use this nuclear weapons. But see, Maxim, this is different. We both understand that. It's one thing when this alcoholic with no will or anything says that, and when completely another thing when the person with the balls says that. It's not the tweets that are important, the behavior is important. Where Medvedev was, he was in Oman. And that what characterizes Russian elite. This is how they see the prospects of the mutiny and the future of that mutiny. It's pretty good time for our audience to like our stream so that more people would see it. And I'm asking the last question. So Valeriy, what is the atmosphere after this event? Do you think that the majority of people forgot about it? It's a very interesting question, and it's a right one. It depends on the group that you're asking and the one that you're dealing with. The overwhelming majority of Russian population, of course, they kind of experienced this, they watched it, it looked like a thriller, and the thriller that was happening in real time, so they're trying to kind of forget about it. But those who are in so-called deep state, those government officers and those who are in the elite, they made their conclusions. And moreover, there's some tectonic shifts happening in the Russian government. And the main shift that I would say, that the deep state is not loyal to Putin anymore. It is saying goodbye to Putin. They understand that this president can't manage. And that's the same thing that I noticed in 1991, at the beginning of 1991, towards Gorbachev, when the deep state was not loyal to his patron, to their boss. Valery, we know that what the Russian army does, and such people as Prigozhin and his troops, what they do in Ukraine. But in Russia, it looks as if they were merciful to each other and there were no big fights in Russia. Do you think there is a hope that some big forces will be in the game in Russia? They will not allow big bloodshed. Maxim, you're right. Big bloodshed. Probably not, but there will be bloodshed, and I hope it won't be big. But right now, without bloodshed, it won't go. The main thing is that it wouldn't be of a national scale and it wouldn't be too long, and I hope it's not going to happen. But I think there will be bloody skirmishes, and I don't have any doubt that they'll happen. But it seems that these troops, they're kind of quite tolerant to each other. They didn't even start a case against each other. Yes, right. Because they're trying to kind of mitigate it. And that's clear after the first attempt. And the second attempt is that they're going to be more decisive. Doesn't mean that today the people who are now suing the Russian state, even for some around some political issues, they may hope for something. No, it has nothing to do with them. Because what happens, what they do, these people, they're undermining the Russian statehood and they're discrediting the Russian army. But Prigozhin did do anything like that. Well, he did. Yes, right. But what to do, you know, that's how the Russian justice works. We know this very well. And nobody is surprised by that. Nobody's actually paying attention to this anymore, paying attention to this logical contradictions. It's absurd. That's just, you know, habitual thing. So why is that? What's wrong with us, Valeriy? Why people are taking it as a given? Well, we may speak long about it, but I put it simply. Everything starts with the top. Everything starts with who is running the country. So they are imposing the standards and values on people, and everything is based on that, and this is psychological, sociological pattern too. Thank you very much. Valeriy Solovey, political scientist, was with us. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, goodbye. And I'd remind you that was built in Russian, so please like, subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Telegram. Thank you very much. Goodbye.